Hi Jude, so nice to see you.
So nice to see you too. Really.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm tired. I'm busy. How about you?
I think like more or less the same. Tired and busy, but honestly, like very, very happy to be here with you. It's extremely exciting. And while our people and our audience join the live, I will just give a brief introduction of this European Mental Health Week and of this live. So this live is going to be about mental health in the LGBTQ plus community, and it is part of the European Mental Health Week. I welcome everybody right now in the name of Mental Health Europe, and I really already thank you for jumping on this conversation. And I'm sure you're going to learn a lot, and I'm sure you're going to take some like very good takeaways with you today. A brief like house rules we have for questions. You can tap on the speech bubble at the bottom right. There's a speech bubble with a question mark. If you have some questions for Jude, you can just tap on there and you can just ask questions. We're gonna take some time at the end of the live to answer those questions. This year's theme for the European Mental Health Week is mentally healthy communities, and this is why we're having this conversation about the LGBTQ plus community. I am Margie, my pronouns are they, them. I'm Junior Communication Officer at Mental Health Europe, and I'm extremely excited to introduce our speaker, Jude. Jude is a person that I've been following for years. They've been such an important role models for a role model for like really my journey, and they are a speaker, an educator, an influencer, a creative person. They're really amazing, and I always admired really your authenticity on social media, which I think it's something that sometimes is lacking, especially in the world of like influencers. And so welcome to this live. Thank you for accepting this invite. And maybe now you can tell us a bit more about yourself so that also the audience get to know you better.
Absolutely. And it's an absolute pleasure to have that kind of introduction. Thank you. So I'd say a majority of my life I've struggled with mental health, particularly as a young person. And that was an element of my experience that I was navigating and working through for a long time. I've been to 3 treatment centres. I've done a lot of therapy. And so I've been lucky enough to be able to access that support. But also it's helped me kind of set me on the course of embracing my authenticity and my vulnerability, 2 things that I was made to feel very afraid of growing up because I was bullied a lot for being essentially queer without knowing it. But being able to move beyond that and getting support for my mental health actually helped me to go on this journey of mental health recovery that eventually became a journey of self-discovery. And so my queerness, my identity, my sexual orientation, and learning to get comfortable with myself has been an integral part of my mental health recovery journey. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and that's beautiful and very, very well said. And talking about the impact that a queer identity can have on someone's mental health, I would like to start with like talking about the ones that are called like social determinants, right, of mental health, because the queer community is one that is often considered in vulnerable situations, and rightfully so. So I'm asking you, like, what does this mean, and how does this vulnerability impacts LGBTQ plus people mental health?
Absolutely. I mean, we get it on all angles, and just talking from my own personal experience, and I say it when I deliver my talks, I was homophobically and transphobically bullied before I even knew that I was LGBTQ plus. So by the age of 11, again, trigger warning everybody as we discuss these topics, but receiving such kind of word like names like boy and lesbian in really negative ways as ways to make me feel uncomfortable at school every single day, alongside other slurs, which they weren't slurs, but the way that they were intended were. At the age of 11, before I even knew anything about my identity or my sexuality, I was already being homophobically and transphobically bullied. So, I was exposed to that at a young age, especially growing up during the time that I did in this country with Section 28. There was no information or education. There was no representation. There was no social media access or kind of resources online. So there was no acceptability of LGBTQ people. In fact, it was illegal to even talk about our community in a positive light. It was illegal to promote. So imagine growing up in a world where, you have these innate aspects of who you are, and you're unable to basically see anyone like yourself. You're being bullied for these aspects of who you are, which are your authentic self, and you don't really see anyone like yourself. And so growing up like that is going to have an enormous impact on kind of navigating who they are. And so, of course, we're more likely to encounter discrimination and bullying. And unfortunately, in the UK specifically, hate crime towards trans people has had the highest increase than any other group of people. General hate crime's gone up by 26%, but the community that have faced the biggest jump and the biggest increase of the trans community by 56%. So actually, even though my experience was that, discrimination towards our community has increased. And of course, our young people are being impacted. Luckily, there is more representation and people out there advocating. So hopefully that's making some kind of impact, which is why I do the work that I do. But, you know, family rejection, social rejection, discrimination, lack of access to healthcare, and of course, intersectionality plays into that as well. So if you had these different markers of identity that also carry along their own form of oppression, then that's going to make your experience significantly harder. And so it's quite a complex, it's quite a complex issue and discussion to have. But ultimately, yeah, of course, if we're going to face all that as young people, that's going to make our lives harder, and it's undoubtedly going to impact our mental health.
How do you think that experiencing that kind of discrimination attacks when you were young, how did that impact your mental health in the long term? So how did you deal with it growing up and becoming an adult?
Well, this is the thing, right? So without any resources, information, representation, support, anything, and my specific experience, because I guess, you know, we're all different. We grew up in different family dynamics, but mine was one where there was no support, didn't really have any parents around me. Like, it was very isolated. There was a lot of moving around. There was a lot of bullying, and me not knowing what to do with that, because again, mental health was not something that was discussed in school or anything really supported back in '98. So that I had to find ways to cope and survive. And at that time, the world was responding negatively to my authenticity at such a young age that was what was being programmed in my mind. You know, we're like sponges in the first 7 years of life. You know, we live in our subconscious mind, and then we develop our so at that time, with all this negativity as to me as my authentic self, I think that internalized, and actually what I began to internalize was a feeling of shame, which was the most toxic feeling for me for a long, long time. So I began to believe that there must be something wrong with me.
Oh, I relate to that.
That's what shame is. That's how I see shame personally. Yeah. And as a result of that and the bullying, my anxiety increased. So I was experiencing anxiety every day before school, every night before the next day, and every weekend before the week ahead. So my anxiety began to increase at 11. I was experiencing like nervous tics and like physical ways of responding to my physical stress and mental stress. And then later along the line, I had to find my coping mechanisms. So for me, that involved, well, changing school and readapting myself into a version of myself that would be accepted, which I believed if I could make my high school experience more bearable, then that would be the answer. So I changed myself, tried to conform, tried to be a girl, tried to be a woman, what was expected of me. That didn't really work, but at least my day-to-day was more bearable. And then I got heavily into substance misuse and really anesthetizing my dysphoria, which I didn't know I had, so my body changing during puberty, but also all those feelings of shame. They didn't go anywhere. I just learned to be invulnerable and inauthentic as a way to protect myself, basically.
Yeah. You mentioned that, you know, through the years then, like, therapy helped you a lot, and this is like important because like right now we're also experiencing a lack of resources when it comes to mental health services, and you know, more so for the LGBTQ plus community, because when you, like, this is for instance my experience, but I know it's shared, when you have to find a therapist, you want to find a therapist that is LGBTQ plus friendly, that is sensitive, that knows, you know, who trans people are, how to relate to you, what are your pronouns. So there is already a lack of services, and for, you know, queer people that impacts even more so, which means that the community basically is often left by themselves to deal with all these issues. And I believe that the queer community is extremely strong, and we did develop a very strong bond and like services among ourselves And from your experience, what kind of support, what kind of services did the queer community developed when the services were lacking?
Well, I have to say there are trans therapists that I know. So there are people that are trans, that are therapists and psychotherapists and counsellors now, which is fantastic. I have several friends in the field. Not so the case when I was trying to access support. And actually, I'd say, unfortunately, in this country, the majority of psychotherapists don't have an understanding of trans, non-binary, LGBTQIA plus experiences. Or they might have some, but not with regards, I'd say, mainly to trans and non-binary people, which is, again, why everyone needs education and training. And so it makes accessibility to the help that we actually need more difficult. There will be people that are understanding of intersectional differences, but ultimately we're hit with a lot, you know, and I believe that that's caused probably more trauma in amongst our community, which is understandable considering the lack of access. And we have had to come together as a community to support one another, and that was very much the case for me. And I say I count myself lucky, because I really do, because my first year of transition began in Brighton, which has the biggest community of trans people in the whole of the UK. We have 11,000 trans residents in Brighton. We had a community here. We had people that were there to kind of guide me, that understood me, and were able to help me facilitate this process, which isn't necessarily the case for a lot of people in the country and also around Europe. So I am lucky. I don't come from a privileged background, no money. But again, I had a bit of a very lucky situation whereby my mum found her dad and he supported private treatment, which, you know, she was adopted, you know, she found him when I was 19. He came up at the right time and was able to actually put me through some private healthcare. But again, they didn't recognise or they weren't able to facilitate. In fact, they didn't help me with the queer side of my experience. I just stayed in a closet for a long time. And so again, that goes to show that even private treatment care isn't necessarily able to, well, that was 16 years ago. Maybe things have moved on, but looking at the times, I think that there needs to be more training and education within healthcare, even private. But as a community, we've just had to huddle together. And there are community groups out there. Now we have social media platforms as well. There are groups on Facebook. So people have been able to come together online. Like you said, you know, we've been following UAV for years, and there are ways for us to access some kind of support. And I think community has had a lot to do with that as well.
Do you remember maybe a particular like difficult moment when the community really supported you, and that was like the core element, you know, of your healing?
Well, they helped me to understand myself ultimately. So I didn't actually realize I was trans until I was 30. So that's 3 long decades. I blame Section 28. You know, access to information was non-existent, and the fact that I work as an educator helped me to self-educate, and that experience and then meeting people in Brighton helped me to understand myself. So it was almost like the process of education and identification. So they helped me to understand myself in that sense. And I have got some lifelong friends. My best friend, Liz, she's been there for me through thick and thin, you know, and I hate to call her a trans elder because I don't want to make her feel old, but she's somebody that had gone through this experience before I had. And she's the closest person in my life. She's like a big sister, but she's somebody that's been able to guide me. She's somebody that's been able to hold me. She's someone that's been able to understand my experience on some level, even though I believe that, you know, listen, again, I always come back to privilege. My experience as a white, trans, masculine, cis-passing person is easier than some people within the community, and I recognise that. But it's been so wonderful to have people around me that do on some level understand, and we have a shared experience that no one else can really understand. Not even my own mum, bless her, but they'll never really truly understand. And that's not to alienate anyone, but it does kind of give weight to the fact that we need each other as a community. And it's unfortunate because actually there's a lot of politics and arguments and infighting that actually makes it harder to maintain those connections sometimes.
Yeah, I I know that you work a lot with in schools and with students, and I think it's important for like the youngest generations to understand also how they can, you know, reach for this community support. And what would you suggest to a young person who is queer, who is isolated, who's scared, who's, you know, socially excluded because of their queerness, and they're searching for that kind of community support, as you said, only someone that went through that journey or a similar journey can truly understand you, because otherwise, you know, we can have great support around us, but we do need those role models. So what would you suggest to a young person that is
Yeah,
facing this?
complex question, because different countries, different cultures, different backgrounds, different services, different schools and communities. It's like everyone's accessibility to support is different, and it's so easy for me to be like, stay around your queer, you'll be okay. It's like, I didn't come out till I was an adult, and it was actually easier and safer for me to do that. And I empathize with young people because they are not in control of their environment. So coming out can be dangerous, and it can bring about a lot of conflicting and difficult experiences. Maybe there's no queer people in the school. Maybe they're, you know, it's a tough one to answer. But ultimately, I do want to give them hope, which is why I do the work that I do. So when I encounter queer youth, I want to be that person that survived and got to where they are at a later stage, because ultimately I'm seeing more young people come out way earlier than I ever did or felt comfortable in doing. And that's music. I love seeing that, but there's a concern as to, you know, how they're doing right now, because actually, trigger warning, Just Like Us just released the statistic a couple of weeks ago in the United Kingdom that 9 out of 10 young trans people are having suicidal thoughts. And so that's a real indicator as to how much they're struggling right now. So as much as it's great they're coming out, how are we going to protect them and look after them when there's so much anti-trans rhetoric and noise and you know, political debates that are being put out? And, you know, how are we going to support them and look after them when they are so defenseless as children? But, you know, I do want to give them hope, and just to ensure them that they just got to hold on. Like, that's what I say sometimes. I'm like, to generally just please, whatever you do, hold on. So when you do have the ability to be fully autonomous, then you get to make your own decisions, and you can decide your community groups. Hopefully maybe you could work towards changing cities or countries or doing whatever you need to do. There are so many of us online that are out there, you know, putting out words of support, or like I said, Facebook groups. So we can use platforms to connect now. So perhaps that's the way we can do it. But I never kind of push people out the closet or say, come out because you'll be fine. I can't do that, because that's not the case, right? And so it's about finding the spaces where you can communicate those feelings and perhaps talk to people who have been where you've been, or share your experience. And luckily we have those platforms online now to be able to do that. But hold on, you'll get there eventually.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely true, and we do need to stress that, because it would be great to say, hey, you know, be your authentic self is like amazing, and you know, most of the times is amazing for certain things, but extremely difficult for others. And you mentioned before, you know, what are we doing to protect these children? What are we doing to protect queer people? Which brings me, you know, to the like kind of third part of this interview that I wanted to have with you, which is about the support that we need, because we need a change, we need support. There's a lack of support. And what are, in your opinion, the priorities of those important changes that society and institutions have to implement to support queer people's mental health?
Well, firstly, we need to look at the data, right? We need to look at the evidence, the data, and the research that emphasizes the need for these children to be supported. They are children, just like any other child, heterosexual, cisgender. They are children, and we have a responsibility to safeguard them. But we also need to know what that looks like, because often I speak to adult audiences, such as parents, and I say, you know, we've all got the same goal, I believe, which is to ensure the well-being and happiness and success of our children, except we might have different ideas as to what that looks like. And I, again, refer back to the media, the misleading headlines, the anti-trans rhetoric. A lot of it is misleading, and it's causing a lot of issues in people's understanding of trans people, who we are. And so in terms of what's required, well, in my mind, we should be facilitating young people to go through the process of not necessarily exploring who they are, but communicating and being allowed to be who they are from a young age, and not thinking that we know better. Like, why do adults and parents think that they get to decide who a child is? We all know that that's not how it works, right? You can't tell someone who to be. They just are who they are, you know. And actually, you know, this idea that trans or LGBT people indoctrinate children, I mean, that's not true. I believe that the heteronormative society that we've been brought up in indoctrinated us. And it took me a long time to unpack that. And that really impacted my mental health. So if anything, we need to recognize that actually listening to them and facilitating the process of them expressing themselves authentically is what we need to be doing from the very beginning. You know, I always refer back to that ultrasound with the doctor, right? And when the doctor, you know, based on the sex that we are assigned, biologically speaking, it's the moment the doctor says you have a girl or a boy that then, you know, a parent assigns a name, a pronoun, and this whole assumption as to who that child is going to be based on what? Their biology? So you're going to put them in dresses and skirts and give them a name and just assume that they're comfortable with that? There's an issue there. Like, to me, when I think about that, that's weird. That's bizarre that we think that, right?
So weird, like that. It's extremely, the more I think about it, the more it's like the same with me. It's like, how do you expect that a person that you literally don't know, because you don't know the baby, you know, you just you know, put all these expectations on this person, and that they have to go out there and live in a community that reads them in a way that they did not really express themselves. So it is the responsibility then of the community to make sure that this person feels comfortable and free and safe to explore themselves, and as you said, to tell who they are. And I also wanted to touch upon something else of your activity that I think it's extremely important, because we will have, you know, we will have queer people watching this live, but we will also have allies that will watch this conversation. I think it's very important to talk about your the latest campaign that you just launched, Trans People Are Loved. If you can tell us a bit more about that, and also about how allies can support queer people out there in society, in our communities. What is their role?
Because hashtag trans people are loved, let me just put it this way. Yes, perhaps the concept was created, but it is an allies campaign. And the whole idea is that allies have something to stand behind, and they have the tools to be able to amplify their advocacy, because the majority of people, well, in the UK and are pro-trans. And so where are they right now? Because actually there's so much anti-trans noise in the media, online, all over the place, and it precedes the support. There's more of that, I'd say, than there is visible forms of advocacy. So this concept was an idea formed in order to give allies something to stand behind, that can be used as a social media campaign. By all means, the hashtag, circulate it online, put it wherever. We want to amplify this unified advocacy and message of love. The idea, our tagline is to make love the loudest voice, right? And how do we do that? We do that together, because we're stronger together. We can do that online, on social media. Brands can get on board. In fact, we're contacting near enough anyone and everyone to get them to amplify that message, because what we want to see is more of that. Because I believe the reason we have such high statistics of mental health and difficulties as well, especially for young trans people, is because of the amplification of anti-trans rhetoric. Because even myself included got on TikTok the other morning, and before 9 a.m. I'd seen 4 anti-trans videos, and I was triggered. And I've got to think, you know, our Gen Z, and now we have, by the way, Gen A, who are 12 years old, they use TikTok, right? That's their world. Social media is their world. The internet, online, they see this stuff, and you've got to think, what's that like for a young trans person who's just trying to embrace who they are and be who they are? Like, to see so much anti-trans, the world not accepting and directly throwing hatred towards them, it concerns me. So the whole concept about this campaign was to encourage ally support on the basis of amplifying messages of hope and love and support, because maybe that could have a positive impact for an individual who's alone or isolated, or a young person. And, you know, this has come after years and years of campaigning and even direct action activism, to recognize that, you know, there is a space for people's justified anger. But, you know, I've lived in the UK where it's very common for the anti-trans movements to use that anger against us and to demonize us in the media. And actually, I don't want to play into their hands anymore. I'm saying you're not going to get what you want. And instead, you know, we're going to put out a positive message that has a set of guidelines. We've even got guidelines. We've got a website, www.transpeopleoflove.com is live, which, you know, we have our guidelines, our mission statement, and everything that we're trying to do moving forward. But I think it's a wonderful way to move forward in terms of creating networks of allies, putting out positive messaging, and hopefully just creating a bit more positivity in the world right now.
Yeah, we do need more positivity, and we do need ally support, because ultimately, you know, we cannot be the ones who are discriminated and then also like make the work, you know, like work for society and like putting all this effort in for something that then ultimately like often hurts us. So I think that ally support is extremely important. And so we have one question that I wanted to ask you from a user, which is, what about, this is a trick one, what about gatekeeping within the queer community, and how can we tackle that? Because when we talk about communities, we also have to talk about our shortcomings, rightfully so.
Yeah, and you know, I always say our anger is justified, our reactivity is justified, our responses, considering the limit and the lack of access to support. It's no surprise that there is so much going on within the community. There is a lot of gatekeeping. There are a lot of people that feel that they can speak on behalf of the community and want to be the speaker for the community, and everyone has to kind of fit their, you know, idea of what that looks like. You know, a lot of like, you have to be politically informed and academic and you know, eloquent, and like some of us are uneducated, some of us are neurodivergent, some of us are ADHD and, you know, might babble on for too long or feel like there are a lot of expectations in our community to fit this idea of like the activist or the campaign or the speaker or the role model and actually I'd like to challenge that and say that every single queer, trans and LGBTQIA+ person should have a space and not feel like they're inadequate or in any way unwelcome. And actually, quite honestly, I feel quite unwelcome from queer spaces, to be honest. I've had to step away from a lot of them, even though they've been a big part of my journey, but because I recognized the negative effect it was having on my mental health. And by actually stepping away and discovering the people that helped me to feel good and support me and love me, that's been a process, because I thought queer family were queer family. If you're trans, you're my we're the same, but we're not all the same, and we're not all going to get on, and people will do and say things. And we, you know, part of this journey for me is acknowledging what's acceptable to me and learning to protect myself. Like, in amongst collective trauma, we can get really absorbed and lost in it, and actually learning to look after myself has really been integral, because we can get consumed by it, you know, and the anger can be really toxic, and the upset and the frustration. And that's what I've learned even in my campaigning work. I won't scream and shout because I can't anymore. I'm done. I've done that. I need the positivity, because it's the only way I can positively channel the way it impacts me. This whole campaign, so I came up with the concept to help, but it also helps me. I get to channel all of this hurt and pain and anger and frustration, but in a way that I feel might bring light to someone else's life, but it brings light to mine. The thought that we have allies that support us, that love us. Like, I already feel the healing effect of the premise of the campaign. And so that's just my new way, almost a way of me managing my mental health. But gatekeeping is real. And I think we need to talk more about the issues that exist within the community, quite honestly.
Yeah, I think it's healthy, isn't it? Like, to do that, we have to address, you know, ourselves and our shortcomings and keep celebrating our identities, and at the same time questioning the community. And, you know, as members of this community, it is also like sometimes our responsibility to just start these conversations. And I've been extremely happy to, you know, have these conversations with you, and I'm sure that it really will inspire lots of queer people and allies. I'm sure of it. It was like a pleasure talking to you, Jude. And I wanted to thank you also, everybody who joined. Thank you very much. Yes, that was like our timer. We had our 30 minutes, and they were like 30 minutes really full of joy and questions and messages, and really important, important takeaways for everybody. So thank you very much for everything you said. I'm not sure if you want to like close, if you have anything else you'd like to add. I want to give you the space.
I mean, I'm happy. Is there anyone that wants to ask like a closing like question, or because I'd rather, I mean, give anyone anything they want to know rather than take the space. So if anyone's got any like sort of closing questions that you'd like to know before we wrap up, I'm quite happy to do that.
I think I'm checking. I think in terms of questions, we were done with the one about gatekeeping. There's someone who commented, so much conditioning in this world when you were talking about, right? Growing up, it's
not a, this is the thing. When I do my talks now, I'll say, if you think I'm here to teach you about trans people, you're wrong. Because actually, it's not about trans people. This is about all of us. And actually, I call my sessions gender diversity because I want to get us closer to the idea that gender is expansive. It's not about cis people and trans people. It's like this whole diversity within gender. And actually, social conditioning has impacted us all. And some of us, because we're trans, had the opportunity to actually look past the conditioning, and it's given us an insight. It's almost, I hate to say that I'm grateful for my entire life experience, but on some level, it's given me the insight that I've needed to look on such a broader level at the issues that exist within our society. It's pulled me out of the matrix. And, you know, a lot of people don't have the opportunity to have that because it's their normal and they don't have to challenge it or question it. And actually, it's helped me to move towards my mental health healing journey. So it's been a benefit.
Yeah, we have one last question again. How to talk with children about all of this in a healthy way?
I think it's just introducing them to the idea that diversity is normal. It's like, yes, some kids are, some parents are mummies, some parents are daddies, some parents are theys, some parents, and just to normalize that as early as possible, rather than, you know, keeping them away from it. I think that if you make that a part of their normal life and they accept that and embrace that, then they'll be far less judgmental of it. I think what tends to happen is, as the years go by, children go from this kind of non-judgmental place to picking up all these ideas through social conditioning. And so if we can facilitate like an upbringing where actually they're more accepting of all these different aspects of identity and sexuality and make that part of their world, then we're going to see less discrimination and perhaps children more willing to explore that within themselves much sooner, and in being able to embrace that. I say celebrate. If a child comes out, bake them a cake, throw them a party. That's a way that you show them they're loved, not when they, you know, it's this whole excruciating moment where they have to come out and they're worried about it, that then they're afraid of what their parents are going to think or what the kids at school are going to say. I want to see a world where they come out, people around them are clapping their hands and they feel embraced within our society, but we're not there yet. And the world isn't equipped to deal with the sudden influx of young people coming out. So we need to kind of work on that, I think, personally.
Yes. Yes, thank you very much. I think that was the last question, and our time is over. Then again, it was like a pleasure, Jude. Thank you very much. And I really, please everybody keep following Jude because their content is great and you will learn a lot. And I will see you soon. And thank you again, everybody who joined. It was really lovely, and happy European Mental Health Week, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Take care, everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.